Hi, my name is Anson Mackay, and my pronouns are he, him. I'm based at UCL Geography, and I hold a position of Professor in Environmental Change. I'm also the Faculty Vice Dean for EDI, and I co-chair UCL's Gender Working Group. I co-chair the Departmental EDI Committee, and I sit on the UCL's LGBTQI Quality Steering Group.
So I'm Sudeshna from UCL. I'm a lecturer teaching in the Chemical Engineering Department and a Senior Research Associate in Earth Sciences. And I'm also involved in supervising their MSc dissertation projects on interdisciplinary topics and also have pastoral care responsibilities for the students.
Hi, my name's Dr. Daniel Shitheref. I'm a lecturer in physical geography at King's. I am the chair of our departmental EDI committee. I also sit on our faculty EDI committee, and it's something that I think is just about as important as it gets, to be honest.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sebastian Groh, and I am a research associate at the Department of Earth Sciences at UCL. I currently work as a vertebrate paleontologist, and I actually was part of the London NERC DTP in the very first year that it runs, and I came out as transgender about halfway through. I'm also bisexual and on the autism spectrum, so got a bit of stuff going on, but I'm still here and I'm still in academia for now, so yeah, we'll see how it's going.
Hi, my name is Sharice Johnson. I'm an environmental justice advocate and a science policy researcher. Currently, I'm a public policy advisor with the British Academy, the National Academy for the Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences.
Hi, yes, I am Professor Christopher Jackson. I am Chair of Sustainable Geoscience at the University of Manchester.
Well, in a literal sense, towards the end of my PhD, I saw a postdoc advertised at UCL Geography in 1992. I applied and I got the post. So that was kind of sort of very matter of fact. I spent 6 years as a postdoc going from contract to contract before taking in a role in the department. A lectureship in my department did come up, but I totally screwed up the interview, if I'm honest. Mainly, I think at the time through sort of crippling imposter syndrome, which I think of a lot of people who are kind of in the minority in the sciences feel at some point or another. And especially, I kind of felt that I could never really be sort of a true academic, but I kind of like sort of gradually realized that what I was doing was I just put myself down all the time. And so when another lectureship came up in the department, and with massive encouragement from my partner, I applied, and luckily I got the job. But I really would have never done so without his help. So really what I think I'm saying here is that the biggest obstacle was myself. I would encourage sort of all students coming in to do a PhD is that we often feel that we're never as good as everyone else around us. But in truth, we're all thinking that of each other. I think we need to have just a bit more confidence in our own selves. And once you kind of accept that you've got there on your own merits, then I think that kind of makes some of the obstacles seem less daunting.
I was fortunate that I had the opportunity to work in some of the best places in the world in India, Scotland, and England for my undergraduate, postgraduate, and my postdoctoral studies. So there's outstanding people, this outstanding opportunities definitely motivated me. I work very hard, and that's possible because I enjoy my work. I've always enjoyed my work. There have been many obstacles, of course. One of the challenges that I face is balancing care responsibilities with a job that is as involved as ours, because our job is not a 9 to 5 job. You don't switch off. But what I noticed is that I got better in that with time. I took career breaks 2 years after having, I have two children, so 2 years after having each one of them. So it's 4 years of career break in total. And getting back and fitting in again was a big challenge. But nevertheless, if I have to do it again, I would do the same thing because that's the only way that works best for me and my family and my children.
I would say it goes beyond my identity, right, to actual systems. As a Black mixed heritage woman, absolutely, I did see a lot of sexism, subtle and not so subtle racism. But what I will say is for a while, I was just very naive about it all. So I had my blinders on. So I just didn't listen to any of it, right? And I didn't pay attention to any of it. So I couldn't let it get to me, because the second that I remove those blinders, it's just all so overwhelming. So not everybody wants to put those blinders on, or has the ability to do that. And so, yeah, it absolutely affects people, right? Like, my personal experience is not everybody's experience. What I found is, I mean, definitely with the sexism is rampant in science and academia and just the world generally, right? It's like just a microcosm that reflects the world, and it amplifies those issues. And so you will run into it. Looking back, I would have handled it differently. I probably would have tried to, organize with others who were feeling the same way, disenfranchised by, patriarchy and white supremacy and all of that. I would absolutely have done that and tried to tackle those issues at that time, rather than keeping my head down and moving forward. But I also will say that there's no shame in doing that, because, you've got to do what you got to do to survive as well. Yeah, so my identity has affected things, especially in my career. It's difficult to tell sometimes if I'm being approached because I'm an expert in something, or I'm knowledgeable in something, or I have good takes and thoughts on certain issues, or is it just because I'm a Black woman, and that's trendy for different organizations. Like, oh, this is a problem now, so let's find all the Black and brown people that we can to speak on this issue. I don't know, but if I've made the decision that, as true as that might be, that it might still help, as long as I'm aware of the systems that we're in and what I might be contributing to the problem by doing these things. So I have to be very clear about what it is that I communicate when I speak on certain issues and what I bring to the table.
It definitely has. But I must say here that I think it doesn't come into play with people you work and interact with directly and close. They know you, they're aware of your skill set. But otherwise, as a system, there is a problem. I do face unconscious demotion, which is really very frustrating. And I don't know if it is my gender or racial identity. Most likely, it's both of them coming together. A woman of color is not likely to be considered for a defined leadership position. We are basically left to ourselves to identify suitable roles and career progression pathways. Whenever opportunities are offered, they are delayed. This includes promotions. We are also likely to be left out of informal networks and receive any informal mentoring.
Not realizing at the time, but I held multiple identities during my career. I think to some extent that we all do. I've always been a very kind of like out gay person. When I came out as a student at Edinburgh University in the mid to late 1980s, this is the time of AIDS and repressive legislation in the form of Clause 28, which then became Section 28, which acted to ban the normality or acceptance of being LGBT in schools and local authorities. I think at that time it's fair to say that LGBTQI plus people were sort of feared and loathed in equal measure. That was true, I think, in England, and it was certainly true in Scotland as well. But being a student in Edinburgh and Manchester is one thing, and being out, because then you were kind of like a student, you could be quite radical. But being a postdoc in London was actually very different. And while being in London opened up more opportunity to to be oneself, because London was quite a gay city, and that was absolutely brilliant. You could really explore your sexual and gender identities. The opposite was true in science. And so I kind of felt at the time that often I was doing a subject that was more constraining than the life I was leading in general. And so hence the kind of the multiple identities, where you might be sort of one person at work in one sense, even though I was always out, but another person when you're with your friends and you're out in the evening. Probably one of the most blatant occurrences of homophobia that I've experienced I was at my very first international conference in Uppsala in Sweden, and at the time that was kind of pretty traumatic for me because I wasn't in my own country. I didn't have very much money. I kind of felt locked up in my hotel room all the time. So conferences, especially international ones, were sometimes quite challenging. Being LGBT in the 1990s, and even at UCL, I was almost sacked in my first year of being a postdoc, where I know my sexuality was definitely one of the main reasons for my contract being looked at. I'm trying to be tactful here, being looked at kind of in detail. But thankfully, an amicable arrangement was brokered, and it all actually ended up being okay. That kind of threat was withdrawn very rapidly when they sort of realized what the implications were. I'm sure that's kind of like all fed into my lack of confidence about being a scientist, being an accepted member of a research group, being accepted into academia, which can be in more ways than one an old boys club. And in one respect, sort of being a white cis male, I've definitely benefited from being in that old boys club. But when it came to being different in terms of sexuality, then the opposite was true.
It is quite a complex thing, but yes, I have suffered those barriers, and it's not the people shouting names at you in the street. It's the decisions that are made behind closed doors when you're not there, which are based on the fact you're black, right? And the person who's making that decision, which is stifling your progress, they themselves may not even realize that the decision they've made has been because they are racist, or they may not even perceive that thought or the decision to be related to my race, and I've not been there to see those things. So there's an argument to be made that I could have progressed even further in my career more quickly if I was white. And do I think that's true? I possibly wouldn't have about 15 years ago, but the more I'm made aware of how widespread racism is in general, in academia in particular, I actually start to suspect it could be true.
First of all, it needs to happen. We know there are deep structural inequalities in higher education at every level, and we need to do better. There's been far more conversation in recent years. This has led to far more data collection about EDI. There's a lot of words spoken, but perhaps, well, I say perhaps, actions have not corresponded to the words. There is more proactive conversations going on, but far, far more needs to be done. So what can be done is creating a space that is welcoming to underrepresented groups. And one absolutely crucial point there is to make a community that more resembles our students. The differences between the diversity of staff and the diversity of our student body is so stark. This is in geography at King's, but all over higher education in the UK and probably around the world. And that really needs to be a priority.
So first of all, it's creating safe spaces, or allowing the creation of safe spaces. And with safe spaces, I mean not just things like in the classroom with inclusive pronoun usage and things like that, which is all very important, but also spaces that are exclusively for the groups that you protect. Don't be mad if you're not included. So for example, if you have a women in earth sciences group, don't be mad if for an event they literally only invite women who are in earth sciences, for example, because you do talk differently if you're just amongst peers. Likewise, if there's a trans meet and it says it's just for trans people, don't be mad that it's not for allies, because we do have spaces for allies as well, but sometimes we need these protected spaces that are just for ourselves, so we can exchange information, we can talk to each other and be there for each other. Secondly, and this is a tip mainly for allies as well, speak up even if you aren't in the room. So for example, you hear someone making a racist joke, you hear someone perpetuating transphobic stereotypes, call them out on it, even if there are no black people in the room, even if there are no transgender people in the room, and so on. Call them out on it if you can do it safely. Obviously, I'm aware that if you're a student amongst like senior faculty members, you might not want to because it will jeopardize your position. But in general, if you do have the power and if you are amongst peers sort of the same level, do call things out. Lobby to get transphobic thinking sort of kicked out of the spotlight and let it be given to actual trans people instead. So instead of sort of championing opinion piece number 500 by a cisgender person, maybe just give the place to an actual trans person instead who can tell you what it's really like being trans. don't just say that you support trans people. Don't say it, show it. And be very aware that we are quite wary of spaces who, even those who call themselves LGBT friendly. So as a trans person, even if a space says, oh, we welcome LGBT people, I do not take that as a show that I will be welcome there, because a lot of transphobia comes sometimes from within the queer community as well. So yeah, let your actions speak rather than your words. Putting a sticker on and saying, I support trans people is nice and good, but actually show that you do. Do it by your actions, as for example, saying by calling things out, by helping us on stuff, and so on. Educate yourselves about issues faced by the different marginalized groups, trans people, disabled people, black people, people of color, and so on and so on. There's so many resources out there online. Put in the time and the work to read them rather than have everyone explain it to you.
I think it's very important to create an environment that welcomes them. And in order to do that, the allies would play a major role. I would say if I'm an ally, I should be an ally in the truest sense, not pretend to be a savior. What's important would be to engage in conversations. For me, for example, I don't mind being asked a question. I would answer them. I would prefer that to being stereotyped. So I think open conversations are key. Know about the scientific work, engage with them in discussion, invite them to present their work, and collaborate with them. And please don't let them be outsider.
Well, starting off, I was really into ocean conservation. I was lucky to meet Dr. Ayana Johnson in DC when she was at the Waite Institute, and she is the one who offered me my first internship. And I can absolutely say, without her, using her position and the relative power that she had to help lift up another woman of color, that was incredibly meaningful. And I know she continues to do that in her career with so many others, and I try and do the same. So you've always got to make sure after that you pay it forward. Remember that once it becomes a little easier for you, now you've got to make it a little easier for someone else. And otherwise, support networks, all of I joined like any like women's group or Black women's group or anything specific to my interests that I can find. I absolutely join it, because being around like-minded people who are doing amazing things, it only helps, right? Like you learn so much, and you get more confident in who you are and what you believe in, and in your role, again, as the cog in this very large machine.
I think that in more recent years, I've really drawn on the support and strength of people through organizations such as Tigers in STEM, which is a campaigning group set up in the UK a couple of years ago to try and improve the research culture in the UK in terms of EDI. And from sort of being almost like a founding member of a group of people, of about sort of 30, 40 people in Tigers in STEM, we all kind of had a common objective, and it's really great to sort of meet many people from many disciplines, most of them in the sciences, quite a few in the social sciences, all acting to try to make the research environment in UK a better place. And I think when I really started doing my own EDI work, that was a huge kind of like source of inspiration and strength. Personal wise, my own academic support networks, being my partner and friends, as well as colleagues and friends in my research group, the Environmental Change Research Centre, and also actually in the Department of Geography in general.
So being transgender in STEM can be very, very isolating. Together with a trans woman in the US, I actually founded a network called Trans in STEM, which is particularly for all people studying and working in all the STEM subjects and who are trans. And it's been really great to see, because, as I say, you usually feel quite isolated when you're trans. So there's nobody else at my department, at least amongst the staff, who is. I know a couple of people in on the faculty level, but it's still quite a few. Whereas when we founded the Trans in STEM network, we now have over 160 members who are all trans and all work or study in STEM. And that's pretty cool to see, because there's actually other transgender paleontologists out there, which I didn't know. And in general, other transgender scientists. And it's great to have sort of that community to help with. Similarly, sort of finding other transgender staff and students at the university has helped a lot to feel a little bit less isolated. And obviously, I've been really lucky to have my supportive parents and a supportive PI at work and lots of friends and transgender friends sort of outside university and in my private life that I hang out with and do stuff with.
No, of course it's not enough in isolation. There is talk in some institutions about making it mandatory for probation or promotion. I think I am in favor of that, to be honest, because colleagues who are least likely to volunteer to take unconscious bias training are, to be honest, the ones who need it the most. Something mandatory is probably needed, but the training is by no means enough. We need to look much more deeply. There are deep-rooted problems that need to be explored. And the first step to that is being open about what all these problems are. Lay them out clearly, then think, what can we do to address them?
Unconscious bias training, bystander training end up becoming like all of the HR trainings that you have to do, right? Like it's something that you do real quick. You're like, I have to, so let me just do this. And like, you're usually not really paying attention. It's just something you have to do. And you might even think like, oh, I should be answering this a certain way because I don't want to look bad, or I don't want to be called out or something. So like, you won't even answer it honestly necessarily. You just want to pass. So yeah, that's not helpful. I think important, absolutely important, but understanding unconscious bias is not enough. You've got to understand the systems that unconscious bias was allowed to thrive in. Like, where does it come from? When we say unconscious bias, are we a lot of times we're using that as a proxy for talking about racism and prejudice, and that's not the same thing, right? Racism is a power structure, and so people need to learn about that and their role in it, and that's a little trickier because you making like anti-racism trainings mandatory is a little more difficult than making unconscious bias training mandatory.
No, it's not enough, is it? Because I think, you can rock up to a room digitally or in person and sit through somebody telling you not to be racist. And there's these things called microaggressions, and, women, they get cited less, their papers do. And therefore we need to be careful when we're using metrics to assess people for jobs and promotion. We can tell people all this, right? If they're hardwired into a belief system that everything is meritocracy, then it doesn't really matter what you tell them, right? So I just don't think those things will get us where we need to go. They don't really bring around the evolutionary cultural change we need. I think we need probably more revolutionary cultural change, where we have people being publicly disciplined for transgressions, and we don't have people signing non-disclosure agreements if they have to leave a job because they've been sexually harassed, for example, which happens, right? The general conversation, let's say, about anti-Black racism has been really good. And I think that probably has been informative for institutions and for some individuals. I don't think it's enough, because I don't think that kind of that buzz that was going on last year and it still maintains a bit now is enough. We need that to actually translate into policy change and behavior change. I think that's what I'm thinking in my head.
Yes, absolutely. So at King's, the promotion criteria talks about evidence of collegiality. That's great. That's a solid start, but that's not enough, to be honest. I'm sick of bullies being excused, the behavior of bullies being excused on the basis of either the two most common excuses that I've heard in years of working in higher education are either that's just how they are, or yes, but they're a research star. And that's simply not good enough. It happens probably far more often than we care to admit. And maybe what's particularly concerning, and yet also unsurprising, is that the Venn diagram of the people, the colleagues to whom those two descriptors are used, or those two excuses are used, those two circles of a Venn diagram will basically overlap. And that's not good enough.
But the problem is, how would you evaluate the ability to do that? Because a lot of it depends on the situational context. So as I mentioned before, power structures and so on are really important. So I'm an early career researcher with a fixed term contract, so I'm quite close to the sort of bottom of the pecking order amongst the staff at the department. And yes, I have called out and will absolutely call out things happening amongst my students, for example, when I witness any sort of microaggressions or stupid jokes and so on. But on the other hand, I was once harassed by a professor from a different department, and I did not report that one because the power imbalance was so strong that I was legitimately scared of simply losing my job if I reported it. And yeah, calling out bias should always be done, but in practice it isn't always safe to do so. So I'm not quite sure how you would sort of numerically evaluate the ability to call out bias and unfavorable behaviors.
Oh, yes, definitely. This is very important. At the moment, EDI seems to be the responsibility of a selected few, which is not correct. We have a community problem here, a problem in the scientific community. We have a societal problem here, and everyone has a role to play in it. So the responsibility and understanding should be everyone's. It is not right to say that there is a problem and marginalized people face it and you sort it out for themselves. So everyone needs to get involved.
Kind of almost like metricizing being a decent human being, which is effectively all EDI means, is problematic for me, because you actually can end up in a rather tricky situation where you say, well, we put in place all of these EDI measures and we hired all these black people and we got like loads of queer people in, and then we treated them like hell and we damaged them mentally and physically, but we did like improve our pie charts, our graphs look better because we looked more diverse. It's not the same as inclusion. EDI has to be everything, including the I. And I think often people don't see that. They see it more as just being, well, we just need to be more diverse, quote unquote, which is just like more people and more types of different people. But it's more than that. It's actually a massive cultural shift in how we view each other and how we treat each other. So I'm really, really hesitant towards that, because often that conversation around EDI, whether we should make EDI a condition of being hired, it often is paired with a conversation around, if we have a more diverse body of people, we are financially going to do better. And that monetizes minorities, right? It's a hazard, right? Because what it does is it says we're hiring you because you're worth something to us in a monetary sense, not because we're decent human beings. We think that you can increase the revenue or write more papers for Nature or Science or, whatever it is that's going to bring money into the institution. And the problem with that is, obviously, as soon as you cease to fulfill that kind of monetary kind of value to your institution, then you're worth nothing, because the reason you're there is simply for that bottom line reason.
If I'm honest, I wish it weren't, right? Like, I wish we were at the point where that is just something that's so entrenched into society and our cultures that it doesn't have to be a criterion to say, oh, you've got to be equitable or diverse and inclusive. Like, shouldn't we just be doing that anyway? I think so. So let's try and get to that point.